Oh, wow. Hey, much love and respect. Pura vida, mi gente. Thanks for tuning in once again. Appreciate you guys doing that. We got another giant video here. We're going to go over some archaeological finds and information that they left out of the history books. This stuff is very controversial and taboo, so unless you do the research, you wouldn't know about it. But we're going to go ahead and get back into this book. One of the books we're going to read today is called the Encyclopedia of Ancient Giants in North America by Fritz Zimmermann, forward by L.A. Marzulli. We're going to continue where we left off in this book. Again, make sure to catch the previous videos if you have not. Again, this is the Encyclopedia of Ancient Giants in North America. We're going to be talking about what they found in Indiana today in this book. It says here, from 1879, Geological Report on Harrison and Crawford counties, Indiana, was a site marked as Giant's Ruin. They even marked it, right? The Burlingame Enterprise, Burlingame, Kansas, August 20, 1903. The only ones left. The Indianapolis News says, the way they are digging up 7 and 8 foot skeletons in various parts of the state leads us to doubt whether we are really the greatest people that ever lived in Indiana at all. That's about the only skeleton that can be found in Indiana. The medical colleges got the rest. It says here Allen County. History of Fort Wayne, Indiana, 1868. In the extreme west end of the city, there was formerly an extensive bluff, perhaps some 15 or 16 feet higher than any other point within the present limits of Fort Wayne, which covered originally some 2 squares. It was indeed an immense sand heap. When and how long accumulating, the ages alone can determine. The sand is of a rather fine quality, and much of it has served well, doubtless, for mortar and building and other purposes. It extended from Wayne Street, fronting and within a few yards of the college, towards the river, a short distance below Berry Street, and eastward perhaps about a square, somewhat sloping in its general character. Its highest point was at about the present terminus of Berry Street. Over this knoll there extended but little vegetative life. A few indifferent bushes here and there over it and about its margin formed perhaps the principal part of its productive growth, as is usually the case with sandy points. The Indians are said to have had some huts upon it some years ago. In removing this great sand heap, as in digging at other points within the present limits of Fort Wayne, the Indians having deposited their dead here and there, many bones and skulls were exhumed and removed. On one occasion, some workmen thus engaged, among many others, dug up a most remarkable skull, with high forehead and general formation extremely large, indicating a giant form to the possessor. Continuing, says here Bartholomew County, Chicago Daily Tribune, July 20th, 1892. 2 more skeletons unearthed. Relics the West Fork Historical Society will exhibit at the fair. Columbus, Indiana, July 19th, special. The West Fork Historical Society has unearthed 2 female skeletons from the mound, of which the large male skeleton was taken about a year ago. It is said one of these skeletons possesses a remarkably fine specimen of Caucasian skull and the other one of Mongolian and Caucasian characteristics. All right, so, dodge the hijack with their classification of races. This is pseudo now. 2 pieces of jewelry were also found. One a 6-pointed star, 1 inch from tip to tip. Each of the 6 points has 13 small stars, so small as to almost require a microscope to discern them, while in the center of the piece is a full moon, not discernible without a glass. The other relic is a copper cross, of peculiar shape, covered with figures of birds and beasts. The society has been offered liberal prices for the relics, but will not sell. James R. Duffin, president of the association, will exhibit these skulls, if they can be preserved, and the relics at the Columbian Exposition next year. Continues, says here, the Daily Republican, Rushville, Indiana, January 11, 1906. Giant skeletons and copper implements, evidences of ancient civilization unearthed near Rugby. One day, last week, while making an excavation into a mound-like formation, some farmer near Rugby in Bartholomew County unearthed a number of skeletons of giant size. Buried with the skeletons were a number of various implements made of copper of curious shapes. These remains were taken to Dr. Regenas at Hope, who is an anthropologist and collector of antiquities. He pronounced them relics of the Copper Age in the history of ancient civilization in America. Few remains of this character have been discovered in Indiana. Dr. Regenas or Reginas is having photographs of them taken and is preparing an account for their discovery, which is to be published in a few days. Blackford County. History of Blackford County, Indiana, 1895. One mound builder's skull, from subject only 12 years old, as is evident from the stage of development, which the teeth exhibit, is as large as the skull of a full-grown man of modern type. Do you guys hear that? Teeth as large as the skull of a modern man? That's pretty big. This was found in a mound, accompanied with cup-shaped vessels. With such mounds and relics, the Solomoni River abounds. Boone County, Marshall County Independent, Plymouth, Indiana, September 1st, 1900. 3 skeletons were found in a small mound on a farm near White's Own. They are much larger than skeletons of the present day. Then there's a little image there. It says prehistoric giant, a monster skeleton unearthed in Noble Township. The Daily Democrat, Huntington, Indiana, December 2nd, 1895. Prehistoric giant, a monster skeleton unearthed in Noble Township. While the Panhandle Gravel crew was working a few days ago in the West Gravel Pit, a monster skeleton was unearthed. The find was made about 2 feet from the surface of the ground, the great skeleton coming suddenly and unexpectedly into view by the caving in of the bank. The sudden appearance was enough to frighten even stout hearts, and it is said that some of the boys ran pell-mell down the bank out of the way of the thing, which seemed ready to pounce on them. Readily recovering from their fright, they investigated the remains and found a skeleton of gigantic dimensions. The gruesome relic of a prehistoric giant chief measured nearly 8 feet in length. In life, the individual to whom these bones belong must have been a veritable giant. The skeleton was not preserved intact, the bones scattering in the loose gravel, but some of the more curious of the pit men secured relics of the find in the way of teeth and smaller bones. This find was made in the new pit on the farm particularly known as the Old Driscoll Place in Noble Township. The memory of the oldest inhabitants of that district goes not back to a time when anyone was known to have been buried there, and the remains are undoubtedly those of some long-departed Indian chief, who in his day must have been a power among his fellows. Continuing, says here, the Elwood Free Press, Elwood, Indiana, April 6, 1899. Giant skeletons unearthed. Wabash, Indiana, March 29th. The workmen of the Panhandle Railroad gravel train unearthed the skeletons of what appears to have been a human giant in the pit in Noble Township, Cass County. It was found 2 feet below the surface of the ground, and the bones were detached from one another. All, however, being of prodigious size. In life, the giant, judging from the remains of his framework, must have been more than 8 feet tall. All right, and then continue to Clark County, Indiana, and they have this image here of some stone mounds on the Ohio River. And it says Washington Post, October 27, 1912. 50 Nephilim giants, tombs discovered in Jeffersonville, Indiana, believed to be kings' tombs. St. Louis Globe Democrat. The other cemetery contains the bones of 50 dead kings. The tombs are made of rough-hewn stone, and the occupants were all men, not one of whom was less than 6½ feet high. They were buried in sitting posture, with their faces turned toward the rising sun, and their weapons must have been buried with them, evidently placed in their laps. But the peculiar coincidence is that the left temple of each had been crushed in by some blunt instrument. Whether it was a religious rite or a precaution against burying them alive is a matter of surmise. The writer who opened one of the graves with Professor Green, the eminent geologist and at one time state geologist of Indiana, believes it was a religious rite. The school history of Kentucky says when the first European settlers arrived at Louisville, they found piles of human skeletons on Corn Island, and some are found there now. To the early settlers, it appeared that there had been a great battle fought, and that one tribe had been entirely wiped out. All of the skeletons were those of people of medium stature, save one, that of a man, and he must have been 7 feet high. On the banks of the falls to this day are found thousands of Indian arrows and spearheads, with an occasional battle axe, and once a stone awl was found that had probably been fashioned by one of the prehistoric people. This description represents the concrete facts and is the corroborative evidence of the weird tale told by Mrs. Kelly and her ancestors in their mystic chant of the vanishing of a strange race of people. The story had better be given in her own words to the writer of this narrative. Valentine Kelly, who was a spiritualist, told the writer that he was once standing in a shed near the royal tombs when a gigantic, it says, white man with yellow hair peered in at the window. He said he saw him as clearly as he could be, for it was broad daylight and he could not have made a mistake. However, Mr. Kelly was a firm believer in ghosts and goblins or hobgoblins, and it may be that he did not actually see yellow hair. You guys see, making it up, but he believed to the time of his death that he had seen him. He permitted Professor Green and the writer to open 2 of the graves on his farm, but stopped further excavating as he said the scientists would soon dig up the best part of his farm if he permitted them to do so. But there were originally 50 of the tombs, and now more than 40 remain. The high water washed away some of them, and 2 were opened by man. One of the best-known archaeologists of Indiana, Dr. W.F. Work of Charleston, Indiana, found 7 similar stone tombs 13 miles from the scene, and he noticed that the left temple of each dead man was crushed in, and that the bones were those of men of gigantic stature. Dr. Work spent much time in exploring the habitations of the cliff dwellers of Arizona and has written much on the subject. He believes yellow-haired people were the Mandan Indians. Orlando Hobbs, also an archaeological authority of Indiana, and a man known widely for his learning and research, holds this opinion. So, we're talking about bones they're finding in tombs of ancient people, but then the guy said he saw a man, so in his time. So what is that all about? Like, what is he talking about? He had a vision? And he said he saw yellow hair. So, this is a little funny right here, but, yellow hair doesn't always mean pale skin. Just look at the Southeast Asians, the Malaysians, a lot of the Malays, they have blonde hair. They're melanated people too. So I'm not saying that there is no yellow-haired, pale-skinned people. I'm just saying, don't automatically think that's what they're saying, because they like to add that hijack. Now we're going off a vision he had. Continuing, says here, Clay County. History of Clay County, Indiana. Sandy Knoll, about a mile west of the Eel River, east of a line from Coffee to Howesville, has attracted more attention as such than any other, or perhaps all other points in the county. All of the skeletons discovered were of gigantic proportions, a stature of 7 feet or thereabouts, all in a sitting posture, with fractured femurs or thigh bones, a phenomenon unexplained. John B. Poe, one of the early pioneers himself, 6 feet in height and proportionally developed, who made excavations and tests, found that tibia, bone of the lower leg, in all cases from 1 to 2 inches longer than his own, and could place the maxillary lower jawbone over his own, flesh and all. Continuing, it says here, Dearborn County, and there's a little image here they have of the excavation, what they found. It says a large skeleton was revealed in what was called the Nolan Mound in Dearborn County. History of Dearborn and Ohio counties, Indiana, 1885. There is a large mound in Mr. Allen's field about 20 feet high, 60 feet in diameter at the base, which contains a greater portion of bones than any one I ever before examined. As almost every shovel full of dirt would contain several fragments of a human skeleton. When on Whitewater, I obtained the assistance of several of the inhabitants for the purpose of making a thorough examination of the internal structure of these monuments, of the ancient populousness of the country. We examined from 15 to 20, and some whose height was from 10 to 15 feet. We could not find more than 4 or 5 skeletons, and one not at least appearance of a human bone was to be found. Others were so full of bones as to warrant the belief that they originally contained at least 100 dead bodies of children of different ages, and the full grown appeared to have been piled together promiscuously. We found several skulls, leg, and thigh bones, which plainly indicate their possessors were men of gigantic stature. The skull of one skeleton was 1/4 of an inch thick, and the teeth were remarkably even, sound, and handsome, all firmly planted. The 4 teeth were very deep and not so wide as those of the generality of the European people. They're saying white. Indeed, there seemed a great degree of regularity in the form of the teeth and all the mounds. All right, so again, all these researchers of ancient America, unfortunately, they always try to make the advanced people or the ancient people of America so-called white. This is where we kind of always got to dodge the hijack. So he's saying they were white just because of the teeth. I mean, that's a little ridiculous, right? Just to say that and conjecture that just because he had good teeth, I don't get that. Continuing, Decatur County, the Indiana Gazetter, 1849, Decatur County, Indiana. On the bottom of a big flat rock, in the northwest corner of Decatur County, is a mound about 80 feet in diameter and 8 feet high, originally covered with trees like the forest around. An excavation was made into it a few years since. First, there was a mixture of earth, sand, and gravel for 1 foot, then dark earth, charcoal, lime, and burnt pebbles were cemented together so as to be penetrated with difficulty. Then a bed of loose sand and gravel mixed with charcoal. Then were found the bones of a human being in a reclining position, with a flat stone over the breast and another under the skull. Most of the bones were nearly decomposed, but some of them and part of the teeth were quite sound. From the size of such bones of the skeleton as remain, it must have once been of a gigantic size. A short distance from this mound is a smaller one, which contains a great number of skeletons. Continuing, DeKalb County. And they're showing like a little image here of a round stone mound or a burial mound. That says here, a short distance from the burial mound is the circular earthen earthwork. All right, and that's from his other book. And from the Smithsonian Annual Report of 1874, we got DeKalb County, Indiana. We next went to the farm of Henry Gonzer in Fairfield Township. There a mound was overlooked a small lake, which is gradually filling in from the wash of the surrounding hills. The mound is now nearly obliterated by cultivation. We were informed by Mr. Gonzer that it was opened about 20 years ago, when the skeleton was found, the thigh bone of which was as long as his leg, and the skull as large as a half bushel measure. We dug a little below the surface, and found a few bones, among which was a broken thigh bone of ordinary size. Delaware County. And we got this image here. It says two ancient sun temples or henges constructed by the giant race were located in Delaware County. One of them is still visible near Yorktown. Indiana Geological Survey, 1881, Delaware County, Indiana. The Indians used many of the hills as burial places. Bones have been discovered, which from their size would indicate that they belonged to a race of giants. Quarterly Magazine, Now and Then, 1888. The Muniz Daily Times, a year or two ago, stated that one of these mounds, located 3 miles from Muncie, was opened not long ago and found to be a sepulchral mound and contained the skeleton of a man who in life must have been a giant, at least 9 feet high. All right, 9 feet high. This big Indian story would be hard to believe if giants about as great in stature did not exist in recent times. Evening Star, September 14th, 1897. M.G. Mock of Muncie, Indiana, who has a large collection of Indian and mound builders' relic and curiosities, was at the Smithsonian Institution yesterday. Mr. Mock has probably 10,000 objects in his collection, which he has gotten together simply to gratify a taste of his own in this regard. He has been making the collection for 13 years and is exceedingly proud of his acquisitions. Whenever Mr. Mock is in Washington, he visits the Smithsonian to have a chat with the heads of the Department of the Prehistoric Anthropology, compare notes with them, and examine any new objects of interest which have been secured by the institution since his previous visit. Mr. Mock has been in mounds in many of the states, delving for the relics of the mysterious race who buried their dead and then erected the mounds as monuments. The more prominent the persons are, too, the more relics are found about them. Pottery is often found in the mounds, but is generally in imperfect condition. Some of the skeletons found in the mounds have been those of men of gigantic proportions, 7 feet or more in height. Mr. Mock is a prominent member of the Order of Red Men and was passing through Washington to attend the convention in Philadelphia, right? So this like Masonic, secret society, the Order of Red Men. They dressed up as Indians and everything. You guys know I've done videos about this, right? And here's an image that says the earthwork mentioned in the following history is referencing the earthwork shown on this map in section 2 of Perry Township. The earthwork was described as being circular with an interior ditch. So this is what they're going to be talking about. History of Delaware County, Indiana, 1924. Gigantic skeleton found. About 1.5 miles south of Muncie and Center Township is another class of these earthworks, a mound of considerable proportions, which is said to have been dug into by some parties in search of relics. The excavation, however, developed the fact that it contained, instead of relics, human bones. One of these skeletons was of gigantic proportions. The jaw and thigh bones were in a good state of preservation and nearly complete. The jawbone was so large that it could easily slip over the jaw of the largest man of the party, a tall, big-boned 6-footer, and the thigh bone of the skeleton was 3 inches longer than this. The discovery of these numerous bones fixed the class under which this specimen should be arranged, the sepulture, and would also warrant the presumption that there were specimens of some of the other classes not far distant, though investigation has not developed the fact. I'm going to go into this book now. It's called The Lost History of Ancient America, How Our Continent Was Shaped by Conquerors, Influencers, and Other Visitors from Across the Ocean. Dodge the hijack. Remember, they're always seeing it in reverse because they're finding all this old world uh, history, relics, languages, all that here in America. This is edited by Frank Joseph, author of The Lost Colonies of Ancient America. We're going to go to section 7 of this book, and it's about giants, right? Staying in the theme. It says here, race of humans standing 7 to 9 feet tall that dominated the American Middle West 2,000 years ago was no fantasy. But who were these real-life titans, right? The titans, real-life titans. Remember that the mythological titans were from here. We read that in the other book. They're talking about the same thing. Where did they come from and what became of them? They were from here. America's the true old world. There are some of the questions, or these are some of the questions tackled by today's leading researchers and the new science of giantology. After graduating with a degree in economics from University of Massachusetts Amherst, James V. Ada spent long hours searching for local stone structures resembling ancient Old World counterparts. During the course of his New England investigations, he stumbled across the account of an oversized human skeleton unearthed in the neighboring town of Deerfield, a piece of information that changed Vietta's life. After personally examining hundreds of prehistoric earthworks throughout the Ohio Valley, Fritz Zimmerman released his finding in the Nephilim Chronicles and the Encyclopedia of Ancient Giants, which we've read part of it. We're still reading a lot of it. There's still a lot to go in that book. Jason Jarrell and Sarah Farmer spent 6 years of scholarly research, including fieldwork on the ground and high in the mountains of West Virginia, Kentucky, and Ohio, searching for these traces of the extinct colossi of ancient America. It says here on chapter 29, When Giants Ruled America by James V. Ada. In 1848, then Congressman Abraham Lincoln visited Niagara Falls for the first time, thereafter writing a 500-word meditation on his experience. The eyes of that extinct species of giant, whose bones fill the mounds of America, have gazed on Niagara as our eyes do now. And Abraham Lincoln, the so-called black man, right? He literally said that, guys. As surprising as his words may seem today, Lincoln was merely repeating common knowledge of his time, namely that a race of giants inhabited the lands of ancient America. 47 years after Lincoln's visit to Niagara Falls, George Sheldon observed in his own history of Deerfield, Massachusetts. At the foot of Barslong Hill, just where the metal fence crossed the road and the bars were placed that gave the village its name, many skeletons were exposed while plowing down a bank, and weapons and implements were found in abundance. One of these skeletons was described to me by Henry Mather, who saw it as being of monstrous size. The head as big as a peck basket, with double teeth all around. The skeleton was examined by Dr. Stephen W. Williams, who said the owner must have been nearly 8 feet high. In all cases noted in this paragraph, the bodies were placed in a sitting posture, facing the east. Similar accounts may be found in the late 19th century and early 20th century issues of Scientific American, American Antiquarian, the Smithsonian Institution, the New York Times, Washington Post, and local town and county histories. The widely dispersed sources commonly reported giant skeletal finds with double rows of teeth, unusually thick skulls, jawbones so large they could fit over the face of a living man, and strange writings or hieroglyphics found at the burial sites. According to American Antiquarian, for example, a skeleton 7 feet 6 inches long was found during 1884 in a massive stone structure likened to a temple chamber within a mound at Kanawha County, West Virginia. 4 years later, remains of 7 skeletons, 7 to 8 feet tall, were unearthed in the upper Midwest. 7 skeletons placed in sitting position were uncovered from a burial mound near Clearwater, Minnesota. The highly unusual skulls had double rows of teeth in both the upper and lower jaws, right? That's pretty crazy. Native American oral history clearly speaks of a race of giants inhabiting the Ohio Valley and beyond in prehistory, when they were at the center of the widespread warfare near the junction of the Hart and Missouri rivers, is an old cemetery of fully 100 acres in extent, filled with bones of a giant race. Sheldon was the first president of the Pocumtuck Valley Memorial Hall Museum, which preserves his original scrapbook of newspaper clippings about the region's giant skeletons. Until only a few years ago, giant skeletal remains were on display at the Pocumtuck Museum itself. According to the institution's 1886 catalog of curiosities and relics, they were found near the town of Gill, Massachusetts. Also displayed were the skull, jawbone, and thigh bone belonging to an at least 8-foot skeleton from Marion County, Ohio. All were re-entered as part of the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act. Among the items in Sheldon's scrapbook is the story of Martha's Vineyard by Charles Gilbert Hine from 1908. Some 15 years ago, the skeleton of an Indian giant in almost perfect preservation was dug up in the same locality, Cedar Neck, Massachusetts. The bones indicated a man easily 6 feet and a half, possibly 7 feet high. An unusual feature was complete a double row of teeth on both the upper and lower jaws. Another report was 1907's History of the Town of Rockingham, Vermont, by Lyman Simpson Hayes. When the earth was removed from the top of the ledges east of the falls, a remarkable human skeleton, unmistakably that of an Indian, was found. Those who saw it told the writer the jawbone was of such size that a large man could easily slip over his face, and the teeth, which were all double, were perfect. In 1906, Thomas Weston's History of the Town of Middleborough, Massachusetts, reported, a few years ago, when the highway was straightened and repaired, remains were found. When his skeleton was measured by Dr. Morrill Robinson and others, it was found that the thigh bone was 4 inches longer than that bone in an ordinary man, and that he had a double row of teeth in each jaw. His height must have been at least 7 feet and 8 inches. A similar find was described by Maine's Harry Hayman Cochrane in History of Monmouth in Wales. Not many years ago, a massive Indian skeleton was exhumed at East Monmouth. By proceeding carefully, the entire frame was unearthed. It proved to be that of a giant, measuring almost 7.5 feet in height. The skull is said to be as large as a common iron tea kettle. According to Volume 5 of Gleason's Literary Companion, an Indian skeleton of immense size was recently discovered 3 feet underground near Fort River, Hadley, Massachusetts. The bones were so far decomposed that most of them crumbled upon exposure to the air. Some of the doctors think that the Indian was not less than 7 feet high and 100 years old when he died. History of Montauk told how Indian skeletons were exhumed on L Street near the falls in 1873. And on the opposite shore, Mr. Smith dug out 7 skeletons buried in a sitting posture, each about 7 feet in stature. The New England Magazine reported in 1897 the spot where the village of Edgartown stands today was at that time an ancient Indian burial ground. In one case, a huge jawbone of a man was dug up out from the ground, larger than that of any man at the present time, so large that it could be placed against the face of an ordinary man and entirely surround his jaw. Tripp and Osgood explained in 1850s Guide to the White Mountains and the Lake of New Hampshire that a skeleton was exhumed in this town, Moultonborough, some 30 years ago, of almost fabulous proportions. It was buried in a sandy soil on the shore of the lake near the mouth of a small river. It was apparently the skeleton of a man some 7 feet high, the jawbones passing easily over the face of a large man. According to Volume 2 of the History of Western Massachusetts, Mr. J.D. Cannon has in his possession a broken pipe and a copper tomahawk, which were unearthed together with the gigantic skeleton of an Indian. It doubtless belonged to a warrior renowned in his day and race and was probably brought from the region of Superior. The skeleton of an Indian warrior, at least 6 feet 6 inches, wrote the Friends Intelligencer, was found in Muscongus, Maine, a few days ago by 2 men digging a cellar. The body had been buried in a sitting posture facing east, and about it were found iron implements and spear and arrowheads, while around the arms were copper bands covered with curious carvings. Marcia S. Moore's forensic comparison of a modern 6-foot, that's the image we're looking at here. 6-foot tall man with a representative of the wrong Nong Weto Wanka or red-haired giant sorceress, as they are recalled in Ojibwa Indian oral traditions. There are also reports of 8-foot skeletons from New Haven and Trumbull, Connecticut, Burryville, Rhode Island, and giant skeletons in Northfield, Quincy, Chelmsford, Newton, and Massachusetts. Some of these remains were allegedly found with iron and copper implements. The following is remarkably similar to the Smithsonian Institution account of a mound builder grave opened in West Virginia. The larger of the 2 skeletons represented a man conceivably approaching 8 feet in height when living. All the bones were badly decayed, except those of the left wrist, which had been preserved by 2 heavy copper bracelets. A skeleton measuring 7.5 feet in length and 19 inches across the shoulders was discovered. Each wrist was encircled by 6 heavy copper bracelets. Warren K. Moorhead, the early 20th century dean of American archaeology, uncovered a giant skeleton covered in copper armor in Illinois and excavated a mound at Tioga Point, Pennsylvania, that yielded 68 skeletons, averaging 7 feet in height. All right, a total of 68. Specimens were sent to the American Investigating Museum in Philadelphia, from where they were stolen, right, in parentheses, right, stolen or hidden, and never heard from again. He also unearthed 2 giant skeletons with massive teeth in Bridgeport, Connecticut. For having had the temerity of bringing such academically heretical finds to public notice, even Moorhead's stellar reputation could not escape censure from his conventional colleagues. Sympathetic antiquarian Martin Dutre summarized the state of affairs in archaeology at the time and thereafter. We have fully documented, reliable accounts of Smithsonian Institution personnel traveling to 1800 communities in Middle America to take possession, of large skeletons exhumed from the mounds. They were covering it up. We know what the Smithsonian was doing. In certain instances, the handover of remains and artifacts was done with a degree of formal ceremony, with the town mayor, local minister, or assorted dignitaries turning out, and the spectacle of speeches and handshakes reported in the local newspaper. Mound researchers such as Patricia Mason of Newark, Ohio, and following up many of these reports have applied to the Smithsonian Institution for information related to the present-day whereabouts of those skeletons gifted to the museum's collection, only to be told that the Smithsonian never received any such item. Like so many of these remains, it joined more than 18,000, listen, 18,000 skeletons of mound builder giants and Native Americans stored in their catacombs, inaccessible to the public. More recently, Thomas Kuhn's The Structure of Scientific Revolutions described the present climate of academic affairs relating to anomalous finds. Mop-up operations are what engage most scientists throughout their careers. This paradigm-based research is an attempt to force nature into the preformed and relatively inflexible box that the paradigm supplies. No effort is made to call forth new sorts of phenomena, no effort to discover anomalies. When anomalies pop up, they are usually discarded or ignored. Anomalies are usually not even noticed, and no effort is made to invent a new theory, and there is no tolerance for those who try. But from Abraham Lincoln's Niagara Falls visit to our times, American history is full of corroborating claims for pre-Columbian giants not easy to ignore. In 1754, George Washington was overseeing the building of a fort for his militia force at Winchester, Virginia. While digging, Washington's men uncovered multiple skeletons, which Washington stated were 7 feet long. His report matched accounts of earlier explorers such as Lewis Mitchell, who was shown by local Native Americans in Virginia ancient burial mounds of warriors more than 7 feet tall. Mitchell's maps and diaries are currently stored in London's Royal Archives. Washington is also said to have investigated giant skeletal remains unearthed immediately prior to a battle. Curiously, excavation of a 9-foot, a 9-foot, 4-inch skeleton at Britain's Stonehenge was made in 1713. There seems to be a larger story here. What was this race of pre-Columbian giants, and where did they come from? All right, he's trying to put them, coming from somewhere else. That's why he's asking this. Did Native Americans interbreed with them? Accounting for colonial era reports of giants occasionally encountered in the backwoods of New England? Answers apparently lie among the mute skeletons of this vanished people. All right, so we're going to continue in another book we've been reading, and all these giant, some of these giant videos that I've put out. This book is The Ancient Giants Who Ruled America, The Missing Skeletons, and the Great Smithsonian Cover-Up by Richard J. Dewhurst, all right? The Giants Who Ruled America. Says here, large skeletons found in Minnesota. Bemidji Daily Pioneer, October 3rd, 1916. Some large mounds have been found in this territory. In some places, a number of pieces of pottery have been unearthed. It will be remembered that when the dam at International Falls was under construction, several hundred pieces of tempered copper were unearthed from a depth of 15 feet. The articles consisted of fish hooks, knives, spears, and arrows. The art of tempering copper, which was known by these early mound builders, is now a lost art. An unusually large skeleton was also unearthed and thought to have been a woman. Physicians who have examined the skeleton declare that it represented a type of early prehistoric persons who were 7 feet tall or more and who possessed an especially large lower jaw. They drew this conclusion because the skeleton found was that of a person of very large stature. The jawbone was wide, and its construction is said to be a special gift of nature to the early man in order that he could masticate the coarser foods, which then made up his subsistence. The skull is very large. The well-rounded forehead gives evidence of considerable development of intelligence of the Rainy Lake territory. The skeleton will be sent to the Minnesota Historical society. Continues, says here, Niagara's Ancient Cemetery of Giants. Daily Telegraph, Toronto, Ontario, August 23rd, 1871. A remarkable sight, 200 skeletons in Cayuga Township. A singular discovery by a Torontonian and others, a vast Golgotha opened to view some remains of the giants that were in those days, from our own correspondence. Cayuga, New York. On Wednesday last, Reverend Nathaniel Wardell, Messrs. Orrin Wardell of Toronto and Daniel Fredenberg were digging on the farm of the latter gentleman, which is on the banks of the Grand River in the township of Cayuga. When they got to 5 or 6 feet below the surface, a strange sight met them. Piled in layers, one upon top of the other, were some 200 skeletons of human beings nearly perfect, around the neck of each one being a string of beads. There were also deposited in this pit a number of axes and skimmers made of stone. In the jaws of several of the skeletons were large stone pipes, one of which Mr. O. Wardell took with him to Toronto a day or two after the Golgotha was unearthed. These skeletons are those of men of gigantic stature, right? We're talking about 200. Some of them measure 9 feet. 9 feet, all right? Very few of them being less than 7 feet. Some of the thigh bones were found to be at least a foot longer than those at present known, and one of the skulls being examined completely covered the head of an ordinary person. These skeletons are supposed to belong to those of a race of people anterior to the Indians. Some 3 years ago, the bones of a mastodon were found embedded in the earth about 6 miles from this spot. The pit and its ghastly occupants are now open to the view of any who may wish to make a visit there. Continuing, says here, the missing giants in North Carolina. In North Carolina, significant finds were made in the Yadkin Valley of Caldwell County in 1883 that included one group of 4 skeletons in seated positions and a pair lying on their backs. One of the recumbent skeletons was of a man who was reported to be 7 feet tall. At another site in North Carolina foothills, 26 skeletons were found in unusual burial positions associated with other mound builder sites. In yet another location, 16 skeletons were found in seated, squatting, and prone positions, in the center of which was a skeleton standing upright in a large stone cist, which is a burial chamber made of stone or hollow tree. The following section is from an October 18, 1962, Associated Press article that includes extensive quotes from a report written for the Smithsonian. It was published in the North Carolina-based Lenore News and the Virginia Bee, and was also syndicated nationally. This article is of great interest as it documents the Smithsonian's involvement in the dig, as well as the institution's confiscation of the evidence for further study. All right, there we go again. The Smithsonian hiding these bones. Continuing, says here, a giant race, Memphis Daily Appeal, August 15th, 1870. The Indian mound, Chickasaba, human skeletons 8 and 10 feet in height, relics of a former age. 2 miles west of Barfield Point in Arkansas County, Arkansas, on the east bank of the lovely stream called Pemiscot River, stands an Indian mound, some 25 feet high and about an acre in area at the top. This mound is called Chickasaba, and from it, the high and beautiful country surrounding it. Some 12 square miles in the area derives its name Chickasaw. The mound derives its name from Chickasaba, a chief of the Shawnee tribe, who lived, died, and was buried there. And down here it says a giant 8 to 9 feet tall is found. A number of years ago, in making an excursion into or near the foot of Chickasaba's mound, a portion of a gigantic human skeleton was found. The men who were digging, becoming interested, unearthed the entire skeleton, and from measurements given to us by reliable parties, the frame of the man to whom it belonged could not have been less than 8 or 9 feet in height. Under the skull, which easily slipped over the head of our informant, who we will here state is one of our best citizens, was found a peculiarly shaped earthen jar, resembling nothing in the way of Indian pottery which had before been seen by them. It was exactly the shape of the round-bodied, long-necked carafes or water decanters, a specimen of which may be seen on Gaston's tablet. In the same area, it says here, more skull, more vases under their heads. Since that time, whenever an excavation has been made in Chickasaba County in the neighborhood of the Mounds, similar skeletons have been found, and under the skull of every one were found similar funeral vases, almost exactly like the one described. There are now in the city several of the vases and portions of the huge skeletons. One of the editors of the Appeal yesterday measured in a thigh bone which is fully 3 feet long. The thigh and shin bones, together with the bones of the foot, stood up in proper position in a physician's office in this city, measure 5 feet in height, and show the body to which the leg belonged to have been from 9 to 10 feet in height. At Buford's Landing, near Barfield, in digging a deep ditch, a skeleton was dug up, the leg of which measured from 5 to 6 feet in length, and other bones in proportion. Continuing, it says here, remains of 9-foot giants in Ohio. The Cincinnati Enquirer, July 14th, 1880. Also says, see Marion Daily Star, July 14th, 1880 for original story. The mound in which these remarkable discoveries were made was about 64 feet long and 35 feet wide, top measurement, and gently sloped down to the hill where it was situated. A number of stumps of trees were found on the slope standing in 2 rows, and on the top of the mound were an oak and a hickory stump, all of which bore marks of great age. All of the skeletons were found on a level with the hill, and about 8 feet from the top of the mound. In one grave there were 2 skeletons, one male and one female. The female face was looking downward, the male being immediately on top, with the face looking upward. The male skeleton measured 9 feet in length, and the female was 8 feet, okay? The male frame in this case was 9 feet, 4 inches in length, and the female was 8 feet, all right? 8 feet and 9 footers. In another grave was found a female skeleton, which was encased in a clay coffin, holding in her arms the skeleton of a child, 3.5 feet long, by the side of which was an image, which being exposed to the atmosphere crumbled rapidly. The remaining 7 were found in a single grave and were lying on their sides. The smallest of the 7 was 9 feet in length, wow, and the largest 10. You guys hearing this? One single circumstance connected with this discovery was the fact that not a single tooth was found in either mouth except in the one encased in the clay coffin. On the south end of the mound was erected a stone altar, 4.5 feet wide and 12 feet long, built on an earthen foundation nearly 4 feet wide, having in the middle 2 large flagstones, from which sacrifices were undoubtedly made, for upon them were found charred bones, cinders, and ashes. This was covered by about 3 feet of earth. Continuing, it says here, giant mummies of Spirit Cave. And we're going to get into more in depth, possibly another video specifically on Spirit Cave. But it says here, what do you think the international reaction would be to news that mummies were found in Egypt that predated the earliest ones ever discovered there by more than 5,000 years? What do you think they'll say? Surely it would be front page news from one end of the planet to the other. Yet news that 2 9,500-year-old mummies were found in America has elicited barely a whisper. You may think this is impossible or that I'm referring to some discredited rumor, but the truth could not be clearer or more convincing. It turns out that the original discovery was made in 1940, and it has taken more than 60 years to come to light. Perhaps the only reason the public is now belatedly finding out about this earth-shattering discovery is the fact that the remains were not turned over to the Smithsonian, but kept instead by the Nevada State Museum. The original find in 1940 of two amazingly well-preserved mummies was made by Sidney and Georgia Wheeler, a husband and wife archaeological team working for the Nevada State Parks Division, who were commissioned to study the archaeological effects that guano mining was having on any possible historical remains to be found in the arid caves scattered across Nevada wastelands. Bad guano is mined because it contains salpeter, which is used to make fertilizer and is the main ingredient of gunpowder. The site was appropriately called Spirit Cave, and it is located 13 miles east of Fallon, Nevada. In order to find the mummies and the 67 related artifacts associated with the burial, the Wheelers had to dig through several feet of guano droppings that covered the base of the cave and preserved what lay underneath. The two human mummies were expertly wrapped in a highly sophisticated weaving made of tule matting that exhibited extremely fine knotting and hand weaving not thought to exist until thousands of years later. All right, this was found here. Because the mummies were sealed in bad guano, the weavings are extremely well preserved, and they are arguably the greatest evidence of ancient weaving in the world. Right here in America, right, the true old world, yet close to nothing is generally known about them, all right? And these are giant stature, okay? Continuing, it says here, the spirit caveman at the middle of all the controversy. So regarding the same mummies, says the male mummy was in better condition and was found lying on a fur blanket, dressed in a twisted skin robe with leather moccasins on its feet and a twined mat sewn around its head and shoulders. A similar mat was wrapped around the lower portion of the body and bound under the feet. Skin remained on the back and shoulders, as well as a small tuft of straight dark hair, which changed to reddish brown when exposed to light and air. The age of the mummy was estimated at 45 years, and its height well in excess of 6 feet. The original dig in 1940 was led by the Wheelers with the help of local residents, and the two mummies and 67 related objects were taken to the Nevada State Museum, where they were examined and dated at between 1500 and 2000 years old. Now remember, this carbon dating ain't to be trusted. They were then transported to the museum's storage facility in Carson City and promptly forgotten about. In 1996, the mummies came to the attention of Irv Taylor, an anthropologist at the University of California, Riverside, who decided that the new breakthroughs in mass spectrometry dating could reveal the true age of the mummies, especially in light of the extremely good conditions of the Thule diamond-plated mat wrappings and the excellent preservation of the mummified bones and associated assorted relics. One can only imagine Taylor's stunned reaction when the results came in. The mummies were dated to 9,400 years before the present, right? America, the true old world, and what is scientifically referred to as uncalibrated radiocarbon years before present. Yet instead of this momentous news shattering the world of archaeology to its very roots, the Bureau of Land Management stepped into the breach and shut down all news of the discovery in 1997, when it ruled in favor of a claim by the Powhatan-Shoshone tribe of Fallon, Nevada, that the bones belonged to them by rights of the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act, right? So you see, this organization is literally hijacked. They're just gatekeepers, and they use the so-called Native Americans as the excuse. Oh, that's ours, desecrating, put it back, so nobody will see it. Although no DNA testing was allowed at the time of Taylor's dating, the Powhatan-Shoshone tribe's claim held until pressure from the academic community forced the courts to reconsider the claims of the Bureau of land management related to the Indian ancestral claims. In 2006, the courts overturned the findings of the Bureau and the Powhatan Shoshone tribe and allowed DNA testing of the mummy by Douglas W. Owsley, division head of the physical anthropology at the Smithsonian's National Museum of Natural History, and Richard L. Jantz, an anthropology professor of the University of Tennessee, Knoxville. The test revealed that the mummy was of Caucasian origin. Gosh, the hijack. So what does that mean, guys? See, this is where they add their hijack here. With a long face and cranium. So this is what they are saying Caucasian because of the phenotype. But ancient America had all phenotypes. And so they're saying it resembled a Nordic or Ainu ancestry. The Ainu people from Japan were so-called black, if you guys don't know that, and bore no ancestral relationship to either the Powhatan or Shoshone tribes. These could be possibly the red paint people. Although these findings were made public and extensively covered by the local media, this groundbreaking news has received barely a glimmer of attention in the outside world. In order to put this find in proper context and to understand the other related and equally amazing finds in this part of the western United States, it is imperative that we reconstruct the local topography of this area as it existed 10,000 years ago. Although this knowledge should be commonplace to most schoolchildren, the true map of ancient America remains a complete mystery to most of all its citizens. And it turns out, much like the Sahara region prior to 6000 BC, the western United States prior to the gigantic Lassen volcanic explosion, posited at some time around 5000 BC, was home to one of the biggest freshwater lakes in the world and contained a lush biodiversity that one geologist has characterized as abundant in every respect, perhaps the lushest in the world at that time. You guys hear that? Talking about a cradle, a place where life was, with every kind of plant and animal necessary for human life, right? The area of this ancient lake was immense, covering approximately 8,500 square miles in the northeast section of Nevada, bordering on California and Oregon. Its name is Lake Lahontan, and at its peak around 11,000 years ago, it was almost 1,000 feet deep in places and was fed by the Humboldt, Walker, Truckee, and Carson River systems. Remnants of the dried out lake can be seen at Pyramid Lake. All right, Pyramid Lake, guys. Lake Russell and Lake Tahoe. At its peak, the lake's western waterline was at approximately 5,200 feet, and consequently, many of the finds around its ancient shoreline are found at least at that height. The Lenni Lenape Indians of the east coast of America report that they originally lived in the west until their world was destroyed by fire, and they were forced to migrate to the other side of the Mississippi River in search of food and shelter. When we understand that these desert regions were once home to abundant life, the other related prehistoric archaeological finds in this area become understandable and even expected, as we are no longer looking at isolated desert remains devoid of logic and contextual understanding. All right, so here's an image of Lake Lahontan and Lake Bonneville. These were massive lakes that no longer exist. You know, that's all desert now, guys, but they were ancient giant lakes here in this part of North America. Okay. Continuing, it says here, the ancient red-haired giants of Lovelock, Nevada. Now remember, red hair doesn't automatically mean pale skin, but also they're saying a lot of the times when these skeletons were exposed, their hair turned red. So was the red natural, or was it after a chemical reaction or whatever? In light of this, the equally amazing finds at Lovelock Cave, 80 miles east of Reno, should come as no surprise. Once again, we are dealing with Guano Field Cave on the shoreline of Lake Lahontan in an area called the Great Basin. Only this time, the original find was made in 1911 and involved considerably more bodies and artifacts that, because of their highly unusual nature, are routinely criticized and dismissed by mainstream archaeology to this day. Although the related finds at Spirit Cave should change all of the doubters' minds, especially as the reality of Lake Lahontan's Great Basin culture becomes more well known and accepted. Quite simply, what we are dealing with here is what the popular press at the time called red-haired giants, which immediately roused the hackles of mainstream academia and caused them to immediately sweep the whole unpleasant subject under the rug. Fortunately for us, the skeletons and artifacts were not sent to the Smithsonian, and although many of the pieces have disappeared from the historical record, some can still be found in local universities and museums in the area. And it continues saying here the legend of the Saiteka. The Pauete Indians have a legend about their ancestors and red-haired giants. These giants, known as the Siteka, were a red-haired tribe of cannibals who lived near the Pauetes, often harassed them with constant war and occasionally captured victims to eat. Eventually, the various Pauete groups had had enough and decided to band together to eradicate the Siteka, translated as the Tule Eaters. Legend has it that the Pauetes cornered the giants and forced them underground into a cave system, piled brush over the entrance, and set it on fire with flaming arrows, extinguishing the Siteka for good. Modern historians and anthropologists have dismissed this legend as fantasy and allegorical myth, but others have claimed that archaeological finds indicate otherwise. Could there really have been a race of giants that inhabited North America before the Native Americans? Are the artifacts discovered in Lovelock Cave proof that history is wrong, or are they just another hoax? Lovelock Cave first caught the attention of archaeologists in 1924, 13 years after miners began harvesting the several-foot-thick layer of bad guano that had built up on the cave floor. The miners continued to dig until sifting out the ancient relics beneath the top layer of bad guano became too much hassle. They notified the University of California about their finds, and the excavation began. Right, and right here it says these skulls were photographed at the Humboldt Museum in Winnemucca, Nevada. So this is probably coming out, some of the giant skulls they're talking about here, guys. All right, and then it says here, L.L. Loud of the Paleontology Department of University of California, okay, removes the famous dug decoys from Lovelock Cave. All right, you guys see that? Among the artifacts found there were woven cloths, tools, dug decoys for hunting, inscribed stones, and supposedly very tall, red-haired mummies. Thousands of pieces were found discarded outside the cave after being separated from the guano. Most of the non-human artifacts can be found in local museums at the University of California, Museum of Paleontology in Berkeley, but the mysterious bones and mummies are not so easy to come by. The artifacts themselves prove that an advanced culture did indeed predate the Pauete Indians, but whether the legend of red-haired giants is historically accurate remains unknown. What is significant to note is that the scientific community has assiduously scrubbed all references to the 6 to 8 foot tall red-haired skeletons found at the site. As will be seen, this repeated effort to clear the historical record of all references to a pre-Indian culture in the United States can be seen as working in harmony with the NAGPRA policies of the federal government, which work on agendas based on political correctness and not objective science, right? So we got this image here. It says view from the mouth of Lovelock Cave, okay? Then we go down and we have heads of the exquisite Tule-wrapped ducks decoys from Lovelock Cave. And then we got these artifacts, examples of the fine workmanship found in association with the Lovelock Cave burials. And look at this one, guys. It says here, normal sized teeth compared with giant jaw from Lovelock Cave. There you go. That's a real jaw they found there. Now you see normal human jaw compared to that one. You see how much bigger it is? Do you guys see? Open your eyes. Right here we have an image of one of the mummies, wrapped. Okay, guys, so let's read what it says on the bottom. This mummy wrap provides an example of the fine level of weaving achieved more than 8,000 years ago. All right, I told you, America's the true old world. All right, and there goes the giant bone right there. Since the scientific community refuses to acknowledge the reality of the skeletons found at Lovelock, the site has been dated by studying the coprolite droppings found in association with other artifacts on the accepted surface floor of the caves. Based on those findings, it has been determined that the Thule people had a diet rich in fish and game, and the earliest habitation of the cave has been dated to 2580 BC. Since the remains of Spirit Cave were found in the same general area and on the shoreline of the same lake, this could mean that as the lake shrunk in size, the resident Thule culture moved to recently exposed caves closer to the new shore line, or more simply, that the cave has never been properly studied, and more extensive excavations could reveal continuous occupation going back at least 5,000 more years to a date that corresponds to the similar cultural context of the findings at Spirit Cave. We're back in the book, the Encyclopedia of Ancient Giants in North America by Fritz Zimmermann. And we continue here. It says Fayette County. Sunday Vindicator. Sunday, September 12, 1897. 9 feet tall. Was this man whose skeletons was found in Indiana, Cornersville, Indiana, September 11th, while Sexton Charles Reman was digging a grave in the city cemetery, he came upon the skeleton of a monster of a man. It had been buried in a sitting posture with the face to the east and was about 3 feet below the surface. The remains indicate that the being of which this was once part was a veritable giant, probably 9 feet in height. The femur bone is about a yard long, and the massive underjaw is much larger than that of an ordinary man. It is supposed that the bones are those of an Indian or mound builder. Continuing, Fulton County. Logansport, Pharaoh's Tribune, August 16, 1898. A skeleton of a gigantic Indian was plowed up after the removal of 2 immense stones from a field near Kewanna. The place had been noted for Indian relics. Grant County. And there's an image here that says 2 of 3 mounds can still be seen in the Grant County IOOF Cemetery. The Nephilim Chronicles, and that's from his book, right? It says Combination Atlas Map of Grant County, Indiana, 1877. Several mounds of considerable size have been found in various parts of the county. 6 of these mounds were found within present limits of Marion, but only one remains, being just back at the Buchanan and Son Marble Shop on 3rd Street. The first frame courthouse was built on a mound, which stood just east of the present courthouse. This was about 60 feet in diameter and 10 feet high, which was among the largest found in the county, the average diameter being from 10 to 15 feet. The mound in the courtyard furnished the material out of which brick was made for the present courthouse. Excavations into these mounds show they were composed of alternate layers of gravel and sand, on a level with or just below the surface of the surrounding ground. The skeletons of human beings, in many instances, have been exhumed. These seem to have been buried in a sitting posture, and the stature of some must have been 7 feet. The bones, when exposed, seem much decayed, crumbling on the slightest touch. Articles of pottery, ware, stone axes, pipes, and various implements have been found, and some interesting collections have been formed out of these antique relics. Right? Continuing, says here, only 1 mound survives of a group of 5 mounds described as 2 miles south and 1 mile west of Upland. And that's the image of one of those little mounds. It says Indiana Department of Geology and Natural History, 1883, Grant County, Indiana. The largest of mounds in Grant County is that one found 2 miles south and 1 mile west of Upland in Jefferson Township. About 40 years ago, the mound was 5 or 6 rods in diameter and about 50 feet high. At that time, it was covered with all kinds of timber. After people began settling near the mound, they began clearing away the timber. The dirt was carried about a quarter of a mile. There is a basin near, rather deep, and at that time it was covered with trees, the same as the mound. The supposition of the old settlers was that the dirt in the mound was carried from where the basin is now. The owner of the mound gave people permission to dig into it. One day, two men were given permission to dig. They dug a trench north and south about 4 feet deep. After digging, they found part of a skeleton of a man. The thigh bone, ball and socket joint, and many small bones. When the small bones were exposed to the air, they immediately crumbled. The ball and socket and thigh bones were taken to a physician in Upland, and he estimated the bones were of a man at least 9 feet tall and not weighing less than 300 pounds, and the man was not fleshy. All right, continuing, it says here Hamilton County. And there's an image here, it says the Strattown Henge is still visible in Hamilton County. A burial mound at this site contains skeletons that were in spoked or sun wheel position. Travel guide. Lima News, Lima, Ohio, December 28th, 1933. Noblesville, Indiana, December 28. The skeletons of 4 men believed to have been prehistoric mound builders, one measuring 6 feet 6 inches, were unearthed by road builders. Henry County. And there's an image that says Sun Temple Complex located in Henry County, Indiana. 2 more henge complexes are found in Wayne and Madison counties. These sun temples or henges were constructed by the ancient race of giants, as evidenced by the number of large human remains found near them. Right, and we got another image here, burial mound at the Henry County Henge complex surrounded by a ditch, and earthworks survived unmolested until the 1960s when it was destroyed by Ball State University archaeologists. Destroyed by archaeologists. Can you believe that? Indiana Geological Survey, 1862, Henry County, Indiana. About 7 or 8 miles west of Newcastle, a number of Indian skeletons were disinterred in the constructing a turnpike. So while they were constructing a turnpike, and about the same distance south of a town, some remarkable human bones and skeletons of giant size were dug out with other relics during the making of the road. Continuing, Biographical Memoirs of Henry County, Indiana, 1902. William H. Albright remained upon the home farm during his youth and attained a fair education in the common schools of his neighborhood. He has taken much interest in the investigation of the noted mounds, one which he opened containing the skeleton of a giant human being. The lower jaw was large enough to fit over an ordinary man's head, while the other bones were proportionate in size. The skull was a half-inch in thickness, and under it were found 12 flint arrow heads. And then we got another image here that says a small henge aligned to the summer solstice. Sunrise is located on the south side of the Newcastle, Indiana. Okay. And then it says artisans and artifacts of vanished races. Theophilus Dickerson, 1915. Peculiar gravel mound in Henry County, Indiana. This isolated monument of nature at an early period surrounded by water, 2 roadways. Human skeleton, 8 feet in height, unearthed. 12 feet beneath the surface, 84 ivory beads found in ivory saucer on the breast of a giant. A few miles north of Kennard in Henry County, Indiana, is a remarkable mound that covers an area of 5 acres. Unlike the other mounds found in Indiana and other states, it is composed primarily of sand and gravel and covered by a forest of native trees of a century's growth. There is not another deposit of sand or gravel in 6 or 8 miles. The surrounding country is plain. This pile of sand and gravel, as stated in above, covers an area of 5 acres and is of cone shape. When first known by European men, it had well-defined ditch around it, and two made roadways, wide enough for a wagon, one from the north and the other from the south. Farmers and road builders that needed gravel and sand found these glacial screenings to come handy in the building of public highways, and for a small price per cubic yard paid to the owner of land found it more convenient than going to Springport or Mount Summit, a distance of 8 miles. After opening this deposit to a depth of 12 feet from the top, a mound they unearthed a human skeleton whose framework measured nearly 8 feet in height. His skull would fit over the head of a large man, his jaws being massive and teeth in a perfect state of preservation. On the breast of this big chief was a saucer-shaped vessel of ivory, about 6 inches in diameter, containing 84 ivory beads that must have been made from the tusk of a mastodon. All right, you hear that? We tried the persuasion of money on the old farmer in order to secure the ivory specimens, but he was invincible. We had no desire to become the possessor of human bones. And then it says here, digs up bones of giants. Indiana farmer finds skeleton of men 8 feet tall. The Journal Gazette, December 5th, 1924. La Grange, Indiana, December 26. A prehistoric graveyard has been unearthed on the farm of Solomon Hedrick. A large number of skeletons have been found, all more than 8 feet in height. The find was in a mound 30 feet height. When 12 feet of the mound had been removed, the skeletons were exposed. The jaws and teeth are well preserved. Trinkets, ivory beads on a shield made of bone were in the graves. Continuing, Huntington County. And this image says, a single mound can be found in Huntington County. This burial mound is similar to those found in the Ohio Valley, with a slight ditch or earthwork that encircles it. The Newsboy, Benton, Missouri, August 22nd, 1896. Mr. J.M. Shutt, while exploring an Indian mound on the farm of Marion Thompson in Huntington County, Indiana, on the 14th, unearthed a number of Indian skeletons, the largest being that of an Indian giant, 8 feet, 2 inches long. The skull is 5/8 of an inch thick. All right, a lot of 8-footers right here. Jay County. And this image says, a single mound of 3 is still visible in Jay County. The mound was constructed on the shore of an ancient lake. The opposite shoreline can be seen in the distance. The Nephilim Chronicles, all right, that's from his book, The Nephilim Chronicles. History of Randolph County, Indiana, 1885. Jay County. In a ditch dug by Joseph Stevens in the northeast part of Green Township, nearly south of Power Station, to drain a pond, great numbers of human bones were taken out, many being of unusual size. The jawbones were full of teeth. There was found also what seemed to be a shriveled hand, like that of a little child. Jennings County. Indianapolis News, November 11th, 1875. Jennings County, Indiana. Remains of a vanished giants found in its state. One of the strangest contributions ever to come to hand tells of the existence in what is now Indiana, long before statehood and even before the Indians came here, of a mysterious giant mound builders race whose men were more than 9 feet tall. What's more, the contributor of this odd information, Ellen W. Ox of Columbus, Indiana, wrote that evidence of their one-time existence here still remains near Brewersville, Jennings County. She quoted from the geological report many years ago on Jennings County by W. W. Borden that the remains of the largest work of those mound builders in that country were to be seen on the bluffs 75 to 100 feet above Sand Creek and Sand Creek Township. The report added, it is a stone mound 71 feet in diameter, showing at this time a height of 3 to 5 feet above the surrounding surface. The exterior walls appeared to be made of stone placed on edge, but the central portion did not show any regular arrangement of the stones. Mrs. Ox said that the first discovery of human skeletal remains in that mound was made in 1865, when a farmer, getting stone for a spring house, dug into a sort of tomb in which he found the skeleton of a small child. She quoted George M. Robinson, his son, as saying, "The top of the mound was not less than 30 feet above the level of the surrounding ground." He added, "I well remember that several large forest trees were growing on top. One was a white oak not less than 3 feet in diameter at the base." Discovery of the child's skeleton aroused much curiosity, causing several people to dig into the top of the mound and resulting in the finding of several other skeletons. Mrs. Ox added, "Some of them were bound with perfectly preserved bands of cedar wrapped around their chest, while others were charred, perhaps in observance of a religious rite. Weapons found with the skeletons were unlike those used by Indians." She quoted Robinson further as saying that no intelligent investigative work was conducted there until 1879, 14 years after the discovery of the mound. He continued, "The state geologist brought a couple of men here, one from Cincinnati and one from New York, and with Dr. Charles Green of North Vernon, they made quite an extensive examination. Among other things found was the skeleton of a man. It was intact, or rather, I might say, the bones were not scattered. It measured 9 feet 8 inches, all right, 9-footer. There was sort of a necklace of mica lying around the neck and down across the breast. At the feet stood a sort of image made of bird or burned clay with pieces of flint rock embedded in it. Robinson kept the image and some of the bones. Mrs. Ox said that as late as 1937, bones of that giant were in a basket in the office of the Keller Mill along Sand Creek, about a mile below Mounds site. Kenneth Keller, grandson of Robinson, remembers that baskets of bones, he said. The bones were lost when the 1937 flood washed out the office. Robinson, who told of seeing the huge skeleton, exhumed, added that, according to the men of science who were there, they were the remains of it says a white race, right? That had inhabited, how does he know they were white? That had inhabited that part of the country before the advent of the red man. He said there were no signs of anything like pottery, no signs of metal working of any kind, just simply the bones of a dead and gone race of human beings that we know today, or that we today know practically nothing about. We now not whence they came or where they went. Mrs. Ox said that the giant-like race had worked hard to entomb its dead. The rocks in the mound had been placed end to end with no attempt to plaster or seal them together. She continued, "Evidence that this mound was dug into has washed out until one time. Graves now are smooth indentations in the leaf-covered ground." She said, Edith Hale, a retired schoolteacher, Bueller Keller Lowe, granddaughter, and Kenneth Keller, the grandson of Robinson, remembered the bones and image described by Robinson. This, I feel, substantiates the findings under discussion, Miss Ox concluded. Continuing, it says here, Nevada State Journal, Reno, Nevada, December 30th, 1923. A cave found in Indiana hints of age-old race, giant skeletons, and metal strange to America, seen in ancient sepulture. Blind snakes are found. Bottomless pit temporarily halts exploration to be resumed later. By Lloyd Bollett, International News Service Staff Correspondent, Indianapolis, December 29th. Recent discoveries in widely separated localities of the hills of southern Indiana may be expected to add something to the general store of knowledge of natural history. The topography of Indiana is interesting, from the sand dunes bordering Lake Michigan to the rolling hills, which occupy the southern part. The opening of an ancient sepulchre built by a race of men antedating the American Indian and probably not related to the mound builders has aroused much curiosity. This occurred in Jennings County, 10 miles from North Vernon, in a bend of a small creek where some excavating was done on a mound built by human hands and reaching 100 feet in height, about the same diameter. Continues as bodies guarded, protected by gray stone slabs, skeletons of 3 men, the longest of which measured much beyond that of modern men, were found. They showed that infinite care had been taken that the remains be preserved against the ravages of the elements. Metals not common in North America also were found. Although the locality had been settled more than 100 years, residents near Folsomville, in the extreme southwestern part of the state, did not know until recently that a cave of mammoth proportions existed close by. The discovery was made by a hunter who accidentally stumbled upon the entrance. The cave reveals some things which easily outdo the author of the Arabian Nights and have the added advantage of more veracity, perhaps. The discovery was by Earl J. Nestor, a mail carrier from Boonville. The most interesting find was a species of blind snakes which hiss so loudly that the gloom of the earth's innermost recesses become all the more hideous. Nestor and some friends succeeded in capturing 2 specimens alive, and they were sent to the Smithsonian Institution in Washington. After Nestor and his party had proceeded a distance of 1,500 feet, they came upon a pit which apparently had none bottom. It was sounded to a depth of 2,500 feet. One compartment of the cave was warm and comfortable, and the other extremely frigid, Nestor found. Nestor said, he believed a race of prehistoric men knew of the cave's presence and made it their home, and added that its size would accommodate thousands as a dwelling place. He found many things to indicate human habitation, including arrowheads and stone implements. The pit Nestor and his party were unable to bridge, and further exploration was halted. At a future date, the cave will be thoroughly explored. All right, and continuing, it says here Knox County. Then I got this image. It says Sugarloaf Mound built by prehistoric mound builders, Vicines, Indiana. History of Knox and Daviess Counties, 1886. Numerous relics of the Indians and mound builders are found in this township, particularly near Gray's Pond. Dr. Pugh of Oaktown has some fine specimens found there and an old burying ground. Among them are 3 open dishes like a wash basin, very perfect 3 bottle-shaped vessels with necks, 2 whetstones, 1 image, 1 pestle, several arrowheads, stone hatchets, a large number of human bones. 1 large skeleton was found in a sitting posture which bore evidence of rank. Kosciuszko County, and the image says here burial mound in Kosciuszko County that is identical to those found in the Ohio Valley. Cincinnati Commercial, October 7th, 1888. Bones of an Indian giant. A member of the Logan Grays, the crack military organization of Logansport that held its encampment this year at Eagle Lake near Warsaw, stopped in this city on his way home from camp and told the following story of the discovery of the party of a cavern on an island in Eagle Lake. A.M. Jones rowed to a small island near the southwest corner of the lake and began digging for worms. He turned over a large flat stone near a tree, and under it was a small hole, which was an entrance to a cave. Jones called the boys up, and we began an exploration of the cavern, which proved to be 25 feet long, 15 feet wide, and 8 feet deep. The walls are of a natural formation of stone, branching out at the middle so as to form 2 rooms. In the front room was the skeleton of a man 6 feet 9 inches long. The bones were very large, indicating great strength. Along one side of the cave runs a small stream of water, as pure as crystal, and the front of it forms a small pool, and this were a number of bones. Continuing, says here LaGrange County. Histories of LaGrange and Noble Counties, Indiana, 1882. A number of years ago, whole mounds were opened in Section 13, Milford Township. A quantity of crumbling bones, or human bones, was taken from one of them, among them being a skull quite well preserved. Some of the teeth were almost as sound as there ever were, and under the jaw a massive one was especially well preserved. In the other mound was found a layer of ashes and charcoal, extending over 2 or 3 square yards of ground. This was undoubtedly a mound where sacrifices were offered, topped the deity of the mound builders, and where burial rites were performed. We continue in the book, The Lost History of Ancient America, How Our Continent Was Shaped by Conquerors, Influencers, and Other Visitors from across the ocean. Again, they're seen in reverse. This is the true old world. This is edited by Frank Joseph. It says here, Chapter 30, The New York Giants, by Fritz Zimmerman. In 1876, a young man accompanied several of his neighbors in excavating a prehistoric burial mound that was to leave an indelible impression on him. What Charles Huntington witnessed would inspire him more than 6 decades later to carve a replica of the remarkable find. County historians of the time featured prominent local citizens whose reputations were beyond reproach. 1879 history of Cattaraugus County, New York, was no less esteemed, as it recounted the circumstances involved in excavation of the ancient earthwork that changed the life of Charles Huntington. About 2 miles south of the village of Rutledge, in the town of Conewago, on lot number 45, at point about 60 rods east of Conewago Creek, and near the residence of Norman E. Cohen, there was discovered by the first pioneers of this section a sepulchre mound, nearly circular in form and having an entire circumference of 170 feet. The height of the mound was about 20 feet. Mr. Cheney spoke of this work as having the appearance of being constructed with the ditch outside the mound, as in Druid barrows. The Druid barrow, described a conical burial mound, is surrounded by a ditch or earthwork, a type of burial mound found in both the British Isles and the Ohio Valley. Within the mound there were discovered 9 human skeletons, which had been buried in sitting posture and at irregular intervals of space in the form of a circle and facing towards a common center. There was some slight appearance that the framework had enclosed the dead at the time of their interment. The skeletons were so far decayed as to crumble upon exposure to the atmosphere, but were all of very large size. Another set of giant remains was made not far from the Conewago Creek site, and likewise described by the history of Cattaraugus County. On examination, they proved to be skeletons entire, having been deposited there 3 or 4 feet in depth. A remarkable characteristic of these skeletons was their enormous proportions. Compared with my own stature and physical formation, they must have been giants indeed. Early illustrations of West Virginia's Moundville 70-foot-tall structure made it the largest earthwork of its kind in the region. Like the Conewago location, it too was surrounded by a ditch, as in the manner of a Druid barrow, and contained the skeletal remains of a 7-foot 6-inch female and of a man 8 feet in length. On September 21, 1936, New Jersey's Randolph Register told its readers about efforts to recreate lifelike representations of humans interred in the pre-Columbian tombs. The full-length model was preceded by 3 bust-length models, 2 of them being reproductions based upon skeletons of a man and a woman found at Moundsville, West Virginia, and the third based upon the skeletons found at the Cowan Farm, brought back from the obscurity of untold ages. A giant 9-foot man has been modeled in wood by Charles Huntington of East Randolph. The model is based upon an image, which has been formed in Mr. Huntington's mind since the day 62 years ago, when he witnessed the exhumation of the skeletons of historic mound builders at the NEG Cowan Farm on the Conewago Road. Measurements which he secured at that time formed the basis upon which the model was constructed. When several of the persons who saw these earlier figures expressed disbelief that such large human beings had ever roamed the woods and fields of this vicinity, Mr. Huntington wrote to Albany for verification. He received a letter from C.A. Hartnagel, Assistant State Geologist, giving figures reported by T. Apollyon Cheney, a Randolph man, who was present at the time the mound was opened. Mr. Cheney's figures, checked with those which Mr. Huntington had used, was an example of the remarkable size of the skeletons. The measurements of the femur, or bone between the ankle and the knee, was 28 inches in length, a facial angle of 73 degrees, and the high forehead would indicate a large degree of intelligence. Establishment archaeologists would dismiss Mr. Huntington's wooden model as a fabrication, despite consistent published reports of similar finds and confirmation of his original measurements by the assistant state geologist. Moreover, the occurrence of Druid barrows with 8-foot skeletons at both New York's Conewago County and Moundsville in West Virginia suggests their human remains were at least related to the hundreds of similar skeletons found throughout the Ohio Valley. And we come back to the book, The Ancient Giants Who Ruled America, The Missing Skeletons and the Great Smithsonian Cover-Up by Richard J. Dewhurst. And continuing in the book, it says here, giant skeleton found in Utah. The New York Sun, August 27, 1891. The gigantic skeleton of a man, measuring 8 feet 6 inches in height, was found near the Jordan River, just outside Salt Lake City. We're talking about the real Jordan River, last week. The find was made by a workman who was digging an irrigation ditch. The skull was uncovered at a depth of 8 feet from the surface of the ground, and the skeleton was standing bolt upright. The workman had to dig down 9 feet in order to exhume it. The bones were much decayed and crumbled at the slightest touch. They were put together with great care, and the skeleton was found to measure 8 feet 6 inches in height. The skull measured 11 inches in diameter, and the feet 19 inches long. The copper chain to which was attached 3 medallions covered with curious hieroglyphics was found around the neck of the skeleton, and near it were found a stone hammer, some pieces of pottery, an arrowhead, and some copper medals. Archaeologists believe that the original owner of the skeleton belonged to the race of mound builders. Continuing, it says here, megalithic Catalina, the blonde-haired children of the 9 feet tall kings. The most amazing discoveries in California were eventually found on Catalina Island in the 1920s. The island of Catalina was owned by the Wrigley Chewing Gum family, who hired Professor Ralph Glidden, curator of the Catalina Museum, to conduct a series of digs on the island under the direction of the museum. What they found made headlines around the world, only to be written out of the history books less than 10 years later. In short, Glidden and his team exhumed the remains of 3,781 skeletons of a race of blonde-haired giants. The tallest was believed to be a king who measured 9 feet, 2 inches tall, and the average height of the skeletons was reported to be around 7 feet. In addition, the team found the remains of a megalithic Stonehenge temple. The selected articles below from 1928 to 1930 detail the discoveries and demonstrate the excitement about them at the time. It says here, it says so-called white, now because they found them with blonde hair. Yeah, they might be pale skinned, but I'm just saying, don't automatically assume they were. They're just saying that because they found blonde hair. Are rising out of legend into fact. Found the mysterious royal burying ground of blonde children fathered by a race of giants 3,000 years ago on Catalina Island, Ogden, Utah, November 10th, 1929. That a race of magnificent, tall Indians once roamed the Americas long before the first European sailor crossed the Atlantic has been a subject for mild, almost bantering debate among archaeologists. None of them took the thing very seriously. It was regarded as picturesque legend, but now amazing new discoveries have confirmed beyond question that, blonde-haired giants, what they found, had already lived in America for centuries before Columbus landed, so-called Columbus Circle. These finds are the most important in years. A new finds on Catalina Island off the California coast overshadow in richness and significance most of the archaeological finds of recent years. Digging on an outlying part of the island, long the favorite location for movie directors, Professor Ralph Glidden, curator of the Catalina Museum, has uncovered overwhelming truth that they say fair skin. They can't prove that part, but they said they found them with blonde hair, right? Tow-headed, highly intelligent race once lived in the West. A vast cache of skeletons. Glidden's discovery of a vast cache of skeletons, urns, heads, wampum, and domestic utensils is no ordinary Indian relic find. Not only does it reveal the existence of a race of Indians living in Catalina at least 3,000 years ago, and we're talking about giants, right? But it poses a tragic mystery. Professor Glidden's first startling find was a huge funeral urn carved out of stone and containing the skeleton of a young girl, crouched in an upright position within the finger bones of her little hand clenched over the wampum inlaid brim, and a circle surrounding the urn where interred the bodies of 64 little children in tiers 4 deep, their little heads placed close together. Some 5 feet below the children was the skeleton of a gigantic man, a man measuring 7 feet 8 inches from the top of the skull to the ankle bone. A spear blade was embedded in his ribs on the left side. There was conclusive evidence, including strands of hair, that all these people were blondes. At first, these Indians were thought to be albinos, but careful examination proved that they were not, although they did possess some albino characteristics. So now they might be albinos, huh? Can black folks have albinos? One of the curator's chief problems was to dry the skulls, which he found buried in damp sand near the water's edge. Great care had to be taken that they did not crumble when exposed to the air. In the daytime, he would place them in a rows in front of his tent. At night, he covered them with tarpaulin to keep out dampness. And so this is the article, and they write how our white Indians are rising out of the legend into fact. And it says, found the mysterious royal burying ground of blonde children fathered by a race of giants 3,000 years ago. Okay, so these are the articles we were kind of reading just now. So this stuff made news, right, guys? It really did. A gift to chew on, 187 giant skulls presented to Wrigley's heir, also 187 artifacts. So 187 giant skulls, right? 187 artifacts found. One evening, Philip K. Wrigley of Chicago, whose father William Wrigley Jr. owns Catalina Island, visited the expedition's leader. Wrigley had been on strenuous wild mountain goat hunt and stopped by to ask how Professor Glidden was getting on. Fine, replied the professor and pulled away the tarpaulin. The revelation was startling. 187 human skulls staring grimly at Wrigley in the moonlight. And then this article says Indians are rising out of legend. And it says at right the skeleton of the man who was 7 feet 8 inches tall, right? And that's what we kind of already read. And here's another image, Museum of the American Indian, Haye Foundation, Broadway at 155th Street, New York, Ralph Glidden Collector. It says here, giants, temples, and missing skeletons on the West Coast. A giant's temple to the sun god found on Catalina Island by Lyle Abbott. Trone Daily Herald, January 6, 1930. A trail of human sacrifices leading to the temple of the sun god of the ancient Channel Island Indians was followed today by Professor Ralph Glidden, archaeologist. 3 of the 4 gates of the supposed temple of Chinnik, that bloody deity of that long ago, have been unearthed. A rich reward of relic treasures awaits the 3rd expedition in search of the East Gate. Glidden is curator of the Catalina Museum. At the North Temple Gate, Glidden found a large funeral urn containing the skeleton of a girl. He believes the girl, a princess from the riches of her ornament, was a human sacrifice. The small hands of the sacrifice were clutching the rim of the urn. Beneath the urn lay the skeleton of 64 children, the heads forming a circle. This is one of the artifacts it says here from Catalina Island, California, 1932. 7-foot 6-inch giant uncovered in Catalina. Still deeper in the soil, Glidden found the bones of a man who in life measured 7 feet 6 inches in height. He had been killed by a spear thrust. The first spear head was still embedded in the chest. Pearl pendants, carved eagle claws, little boxes of clamshell trinkets of carved bone and stone, and a jasper knife blade were found with the skeletons. All right, guys, as you can see, it just keeps going and going. How many videos we got already? How many reports do you guys understand? Do you guys see? It's more than a legend. It's more than just a myth. This is real history. There seems to have been a very tall people, whatever colors they were, they might have been of every color. You know, might have had every type of color hair too. But can't just assume just because they're finding red-haired or because they're tall and not looking like the other Indians that they're so-called white. It's like they just want to put themselves up in a pedestal, like we were here first. We were here first. That's literally what they're trying to do, and that's why I kind of try to dodge the hijack. But hey, it could be Nephilim. It could be, you know, albinos. It could be so many other things that are not a good thing. So hey, whatever. Either way, I hope you guys enjoyed the reading. And again, the ancient giants who ruled America. There's so many. We're going to keep going. There's so many more articles to read about giants found here in North America and other parts of America as well, Central and South America, we're going to get into. But thanks for sticking around all the way to the end and hearing me read. I hope you guys are enjoying these giant videos. Again, we're going to come back with some more. We're also going to get into that pygmy book. We're going to see all the pygmy legends around the world, not just in the Americas. So there seems to really have been a really tall people from 7 to 8 to 9 footers. This was like average, but there was even bigger ones. But, you know, it seems like there was a type of people that tall here. Very prominent. Numerous, okay? Hope you guys see that now. Much love and respect. Pura vida, mi gente. Hawa.